Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in today to talk about Kagurabachi, chapter number 78. This chapter is titled Switch, and let me just say, it feels weird to talk about Kagurabachi again, and of course that's because last week in Shonen Jump and in, manga, I guess just in Japan in general, I don't know why I'm, categorizing this all from the viewpoint of a manga reader. I guess that is because, that is simply what I am. I am not a Japanese citizen, I am an American citizen, and I am not a just resident of Japan, as I just mentioned. I am a manga reader, so a lot of the things I know about Japan strictly come from my love of this medium of manga. Granted, I did take a few semesters of Japanese in high school, and of course, throughout, it being sort of worldly and knowing about the world, I've come to sort of understand a good amount of this, but I think you guys still get what I'm saying of, hey, a lot of the context that I have for things comes from reading manga and all of that, right? But like I mentioned, of course, last week in Japan was Golden Week, and because of that, we did not get an issue of Weekly Shonen Jump, and hey, that is 100% for the best. I am for manga getting breaks frequently and often. Of course, that sort of messes with me a little bit, because it's like, oh, hey, I don't have chapters of manga to talk about. Oh boy, what am I going to do if I can't talk about Kagurabachi every single week of my life, which isn't that big of a deal at the very end of the day. But of course, as I mentioned, this chapter is number 78, titled Switch, and this honestly is such an interesting chapter of Kagurabachi, because we literally get so much. I mean, when reading this chapter, I almost thought it had to be wow, is this a 21 or 22 page chapter? This chapter felt incredibly long, and no, it's just 19 pages, but it just covers so much ground, which is just hey, strictly awesome, what can I really say, you know? But yeah, we just have so much to talk about in this chapter, so really without any further ado, I just want to go and sit down and get started talking about good old Kagurabachi, right? But of course, before we can talk about this chapter of Kagurabachi, we need to talk about what happened last time in Kagurabachi, and really simply put, last chapter was can I even remember what happened last chapter? Okay, yes, I sort of had to pause for a second and recall what happened, but now I remember fully. We had this whole chapter really focused around Hirohiko, and they were going through and oh no, we're going to use my power of, oh boy, what is it called? Play, which is pretty much playing with, what Hirohiko views to be objects. We saw that, he really views those as corpses, and what really last chapter was about was learning about Samura's third power of his enchanted blade, which of course is called Suzaku, or Suzaku, I don't know why I was saying it all weird, but pretty much it is the Phoenix reborn from the ashes, and really we learned more about Samura's true realm, and how it's the power of a pacifist. It is a really big power to help out people at the very end of the day, and really that's what all of last chapter was about, and it was this crazy chapter, and at the very end of it's hey, are we going to get Chihiro versus Samura next? And as we sort of see in this chapter, we get none of that whatsoever, which honestly, I'm completely fine with, but I'm honestly more interested to see how all of this is going to work in sort of general, if you know what I'm saying. But yeah, really to start off this chapter, we start off with Hirohiko. Of course, this is chapter number 78 titled Switch. We start off with Hirohiko pretty much leaning up against one of the walls of the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel. The left arm is completely severed off of Hirohiko's torso, of course, because hey, Samura went over, pretty much used all of his power to cut it off, of course, and that is the hand that Hirohiko was wielding the Kumeyori in, which really makes sense that hey, Samura wants to cut that blade off at the arm or shoulder, I guess, is what we can say, right? But pretty much Hirohiko's just sitting here blood splattered all over the wall. He's crying. It's honestly a very ugly cry to Hirohiko is doing, as he's just breathing very heavily, just going I can't move my body, right? As pretty much Hirohiko is doing all of this on the wall, and Samura has walked over, pretty much got the Kumeyori in his possession now, and he's just alright, now then, as he starts to turn around to, of course, where Chihiro is standing behind him. And of course, Chihiro is sort of in that EI White Purity style stance, holding the, the intin in his hand, pretty much, right? And Chihiro's pretty much like, hey, it's honestly no surprise that Hirohiko can't move at all. And he's like, hey, using a super powerful move is exhausting. It'll deplete your physical and spirit energy, right? And I sort of like how you're bringing this in, like, hey, even though it's just your spirit energy, it can have a physical toll on your body. Of course, we saw this a lot of Hakuri back in the day, right? I say back in the day is like, oh man, we haven't seen Hakuri for so long. Really, it was like 6 months ago or something, or not even 6 months, like maybe 5 months ago, but either way, we'll get to that by the end of this chapter, right? But yeah, Chihiro pretty much thinks about all of this, and he just says, like, hey, what's normal is what's going on with Hirohiko currently, right? But what is abnormal is Mr. Samura. Of course, as Chihiro just thinks, like, hey, he completely nullified Hirohiko's all-out move. Of course, he went through and repaired the entirety of the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel. And Chihiro just thinks, like, and the crazier part is, like, he's also been sustaining Al throughout Japan for days here in this moment, and despite all of that, he still isn't even winded. As of course, he thinks back to a few chapters ago, wherever Hirohiko just says, like, oh, does he have some power of, like, rebirth, or is he, like, immortal or something? And Chihiro just thinks, like, no, he's not. Suzaku can regenerate, but it can't resurrect the dead, and it consumes tremendous amounts of energy if you keep getting wounded and relying on constant regeneration. You'll deplete your spirit energy and collapse. That regeneration is limited. And he's like, hey, regeneration is incredible, and what's beyond that is there's been a number of things that were recorded during the war, and I don't know what it sparked, but clearly, Samura has evolved beyond his abilities 18 years ago. And I really love the diagram that we get here. Of course, it's like whenever Kagurabachi does one of these, like, hey, we're explaining how the power set works, we get one of these very interesting where it's like just almost like a just very rudimentary, like, a figure drawn pretty much, and we pretty much just like see the whole idea of, like, hey, how spirit energy isn't, like, unlimited, and how Suzaku can't, like, keep regenerating on forever and ever. There's a limit based on your energy, pretty much, right? But as all of this is happening, Chihiro's just, like, thinking about all of these, like, very serious things anyhow, pretty much, right? Samura turns around and just says, alright, first thing to finish is this guy. As he starts to walk towards Chihiro, and I find this moment very interesting, because of course what we're about to see is him not actively battling with Chihiro, so it's a little bit of one of those things where, okay, I don't really know if he's, like, knows what's about to happen here, but as he's of course walking by one of the rooms in the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel, we see that it is called the Hibiki Room, and we really get a focus on the peephole that's on this door here in a moment, right? I really find it's funny this is the second time the peephole has been, like, a big part of the Kagurabachi chapter. Of course, Iori watching through it and pretty much seeing Chihiro slice open all of these guys, and now, as we're about to learn, Kogiri doing the same thing, right? As Samura pretty much just walks by and seems to notice something out of his peripheral vision, as we see that Kogiri comes over from inside the room and goes through, uses his sword, cuts down the door pretty much, and Samura is barely able to block it, right? But as Kogiri sort of, like, leaps further out of the room, we see that Samura comes through, uses the Tobimune, and pretty much cuts off the blade of Kogiri's blade here in the moment, right? And I really like how he's just like, hey, look at this, right? As eventually, in sort of reaction to all of this, we see that Kogiri then comes through and uses an attack called Twilight Wave. As we then get some narration just saying, like, hey, Kogiri's sorcery enables him to store heat generated in his body during battle and unleash it at will. Its capacity is unlimited. The more he accumulates, the more powerful it gets. For the past 7 months, Kogiri has been fighting with only his sword. As we pretty much see, like, yes, so pretty much Kogiri pretty much, like, just keeps fighting, and then, like, almost stores up all of this energy that he's then able to release whenever he needs to, right? As we then see in the moment, of course, Kogiri goes through and unleashes the Twilight Wave, and it pretty much just, like, sends out a shockwave of red, fiery heat almost in, like, this massive explosion coming out of the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel. And we even see, like, yes, this attack sends out a shockwave that ripples through a lot of various things, right? As Samura's, like, just barely able to defend himself in this moment, as he then looks over to, of course, where Hirohiko's body was. I say body, it's like where Hirohiko's shambling corpse was, pretty much, and he sort of looks over, and he just sees, like, oh, it's disappeared, right? And Samura just thinks like, oh, they withdrew. As we then see on it looks like the ground of the Kyoto streets. I don't know if this is right beside the Bloodshed Hotel or really where this is, but we see that, of course, Todo has come through and has grabbed Hirohiko here in this moment, right? And it can't be far because we also see Kogiri just like land beside, of course, the Todo and the wounded, not Kogiri, the wounded Hirohiko in this moment, right? And Kogiri's pretty much just like, hey, Hirohiko, are you okay, right? And I love Todo's response here, just like, hey, numbnut, like, what do you think? As we pretty much look over and just see Hirohiko's just like dying here. Kogiri's just like, oh, yeah, he doesn't look very good, right? This guy, okay, bro, right? But a little bit of a funny moment there, as we pretty much see that Kogiri just says, like, hey, I couldn't retrieve his arm back there, right? And Todo pretty much just says, like, yeah, Hirohiko's definitely going to be out of commission for a while, right? And we also see Kogiri just thinks, like, hey, the Kumeyori 2, and we didn't get Samura's daughter, like, hey, this was a major defeat, right? And we even see that Todo's like, yeah, I mean, it definitely was, and Hirohiko is very lucky that he survived, and I'm also amazed that you managed to distract that beast for a split second. Of course, talking about Samura as this crazy beast of a guy, pretty much, right? But Kogiri then just says, like, hey, but now that our Pact of Samura is finished, we have 0 cards in play. And as he's talking about this, we see that snow starts to fall from the sky around Kogiri. And of course, we know that this is in November, right? And honestly, I don't know how Japan's, like, whole weather cycle goes, but I at least know, like, here in the United States where I live, granted, I am on a much, like, lower latitude than where Japan is, all things considered. I mean, let me just pull up a world map, because it's, like, making sure I have everything mapped out in my head crap. I type in world into my search bar, and the first thing that comes up is the World Trigger Wiki. Any other time, that'd be amazing, but not right this second. But, yeah, pretty much just going up and pulling up a world map. I am pretty much, actually, no, you know what, all things considered, I'm at sort of a decent enough, sort of like around where Tokyo is, about that same latitude, pretty much all things considered, or I forget if it's lat, I think lines of latitude are the horizontal ones, and longitude are the vertical ones. I could be wrong with that. I've not taken a geological or geographical history, I can't even speak right now, bro, I don't know what I'm saying, but, either way, going through all of this isn't normal, probably common for Japan's weather cycle. It's not common for my weather cycle here in the States, as all things considered, to have snow falling down in November. Maybe back in the day, but this global warming stuff has been messing with us a little bit more, if you know what I'm saying, right? But either way, we see that Todo's just like, oh, what is all this snow doing around here, right? As we also just see that Kogiri's just like, hey, well, it could be because Al was covering the sky for so long, like, hey, I can't believe that it would have really affected the weather, right? And Todo's like, Kogiri, are you, like, saying, like, it doesn't seem like you're thirsting for a sword fight right now, are you, right? But Kogiri's pretty much like, no, that insane kind of power is a real vibe killer. Like, hey, Kogiri, I get what you're saying, right? But Todo pretty much says, like, hey, well, currently Euro's on the move in Tokyo, and pretty much Kogiri's like, okay, I guess we'll have to place all of our bets on that. Then it's like, hey, we can't fight a beast like that head on. It is simply impossible. And while Kogiri's sort of doing this, he's looking back towards the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel, where pretty much all of this craziness has just happened, as we then just see on the ground, Hirohiko mutters, "Kill me. Those eyes. Those eyes. He feels nothing for me. Not even hatred." As we just get a good look at Kogiri's face on the ground, not Kogiri, Hirohiko's face on the ground, as we see that Hirohiko is just, like, totally crying here in this moment. Blood is streaming out of all of these various parts of his face. His eyes are almost, like, bugged and almost, like, dysmorphified, or whatever you would say, as we see that Hirohiko isn't doing very good at all here in the moment, right? But with this scene, we cut back up to the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel, where we see that Samura and Chihiro are having a little bit of a conversation with each other, right? And we pretty much see that, like, hey, all of the rubble of, like, the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel is still, like, searing and everything from Kogiri's Twilight Wave, so presumably this is right after this moment, right? As we see that Samura's like, hey, Chihiro, why did you even wield the enchanted blade again? As we see that Chihiro's silent for a second, he just says like, oh, well, I've learned everything about the malediction and the Sword Master's crime. As we see that the Samura's like, oh, god damn it, that bastard Chibi. He's like, hey, listen, that was the Sword Master's doing. Your dad was only responsible for creating the weapons. He was just a hero who did everything he could for his country. And Chihira's like, yeah, so I'm told Mr. Shiba said the exact same thing. As we see that Samura's just thinking to himself like, damn it, Chihiro, he still isn't swallowing it, right? But pretty much he just says like, well, if you know anything about the malediction, we can cut to the chase. The Sword Master can't be allowed to live. As Chihiro's like, hey, yeah, to that end, you're just willing to let all the sword bearers die, and it's like, hey, yourself included. And we see that Samura's like, hey, it's necessary to stop the malediction and for Iori's future too. If you stand in my way, I'll cut you down again. And Chihiro is like, hey, what Iori needs for her future is you, Samura. You're wondering why I took up the Enchanted Blade again? I did it to stop you. Scene cut. And as this scene cut happens, we cut over to, of course, Tokyo, Japan, of course, where the Kamunabi headquarters is located, of course, where we also know that Yora and the Hishaku are currently, like, hanging out together, getting ready to go and try to get the Shinichi at here in this moment, pretty much, right? As, of course, as we start off with this, we see that Yora, of course, is, like, standing on the ground level of, the Tokyo streets, and he's just like, hey, so, shall we fight? As we then see that, of course, the Hishaku reaches down and starts to use his pine sorcery to pretty much go through and sprout some pine trees from the ground here in this moment. And we then cut over to a very, very interesting visual, or what we'll also sort of understand to be the security system of the, of course, Kamunabi headquarters. As we see there's this guy who sort of got his brain hooked up to a sort of larger device that really reminds me of a lantern. Of course, we've pretty much learned how important lanterns are as, like, sort of, like, sorcery sort of, like, focuses almost, and, like, they can sort of, like, hold a lot of spirit energy, all things considered. But we see this guy with, like, a bunch of tattoos running down from his eyes, pretty much sort of, like, sitting on a floating tapestry pillow, pretty much. And we see that his head is pretty much sitting inside one of these lanterns. And we see they're pretty much in, like, a pose that they're almost, like, meditating, as we see that they're also floating above a giant circular pool of water. And as they're pretty much sitting here, and directly after the moment that we see the, of course, Hishaku sorcerer, or the Hishaku member, pretty much going through and, like, using his pine sorcery, we see a little bit of the water underneath the tank that pretty much this guy is sitting in, pretty much splashes up here in the moment, right? And we see this sort of, like, alerts the sorcerer, who is, like, pretty much doing this surveillance here in the moment, right? As we officially cut into the pretty much head room of the HQ room of the Kamunabi HQ, pretty much, right? As we see all of the leaders of the Kamunabi pretty much, like, sitting at their little round table, sort of talking with each other, right? And we see currently they're sort of debating the whole idea of the owls, like, hey, the owl just cleared up, and the Masumi reported that they encountered Samura in Kyoto, right? And we even see that Izami just says, like, hey, they also encountered 3 Hishaku and confirmed their possession of the Kumeyori, right? We then see that as this happens, as Izami's pretty much talking about this, the floor opens up in the Kamunabi headquarters as we see a lantern flows up from the bottom of the room, which seems to be like this portal or like some aether or something like that. As this lantern sort of like comes up and appears, as it just says, enemy attack. There's been a hit to the force field directly over to Shinichi, a pine tree spell. And we see a few of the Hishaku members, or not the Hishaku members, the Kamunabi members just saying like, hey, it's got to be the Hishaku, like, hey, they're super busy around here. And we really get the main focus on, of course, our little short Kamunabi member, of course, with the white hair and little black hair tuft, right? And he's pretty much just like, oh, it's hard to believe they'd actually attack the HQ, right? as we just sort of get a little bit of narration just saying like, hey, the Shinichi is currently being held at Kamunabi headquarters, and deeper down, the Swordmaster is also imprisoned there. The Tokyo Underground, there are over 500 employees, including non-combatants. It's protected by a solid rectangular force field. As we pretty much just get a little bit of an image here at the moment that I really like, as we just see like, hey, there's all of, like, the high-rise skyscrapers of Tokyo, and of course, below it, there is, like, this honestly very similar, like, rectangular structured, Kabunaga headquarters. Really just imagine one rectangle in the middle, and then 4 smaller rectangles that are on each of the 4 corners of the central rectangle, pretty much, right? And there's little pylons that are pretty much running down to each of these 4 rectangles on the corner, and then there's one other pylon running down from the central circle, right? So, or not the central rectangle. So pretty much getting a good idea of what sort of like, hey, this is what the layout looks like for the Hishaku headquarters, right? And presumably where our next arc is really going to be happening, right? But we also then see, of course, on the sort of like high floor, or I say the high floor, just the streets of Tokyo, we see the Hishaku is like completely going through and ruining everything, right? As we see they're using their pine sorcery, just going like, hey, this thing's strong, as of course probably talking about the force field here in a moment, right? But we see a lot of these pines are really reaching down into the Kabanagi headquarters in general, right? As of course the lantern is sort of like here in a moment awaiting orders from all of the Kabanagi HQ, pretty much, as we see the Kabanagi leader just is like, hey, well, let's welcome them down here. Allow them to penetrate the first level. As the guy who's sort of controlling the lantern, of course, this like force field detector guy, pretty much, the security system guy just says like, hey, but like, what are you saying, right? As we see the Kabanagi leader just says like, hey, our primary mission is to protect the citizens from sorcery attacks. We cannot allow a surface battle. As the security guy just is like, okay, I'll retract the protective force field. As we see this sort of come down and happen in the moment, and as he retracts it, he just sort of is like, oh, wait a second, invaders detected on level 1. We have 7 visitors. As we also then see that, of course, the tough Hishaku guy, the geezer of the Kabanagi, pretty much, we see that he's just like, oh, so it's the entire remaining forces of the Hishaku then, right? As we see the geezer just things like, hey, according to intel from Okahiro's son, there are 10 Hishaku, 3 of them were confirmed to be in Kyoto, so these 7 must be the rest of the ranks, pretty much, right? As the Kabanagi leader just says like, hey, well, we'll send a force to intercept them, a top level 1 as well, right? As we see here in a moment, Izami pretty much starts to stand up out of his chair. He's like, hey, it's fine, I'll hit them, right? As we see, like, Izami's really getting into his sort of role here in a moment, as the Kabanagi geezer just says, like, hey, the Hishaku, I thought they were going to use Samura to hunt down the contracted sword bearers first. And he's like, hey, but I guess that's why I assigned both Shiba and Hibiki to security. Of course, we all know who Shiba is, but I don't quite know if we know who Hibiki is. Of course, like, I was thinking, like, oh, is that, like, Hyuki's her name, but no, her name is Hyuki Kagari, so it's definitely not Hyuki, so I'm wondering if we know who Hibiki is. Honestly, let me just check the, the Kagurabachi wiki, because it may be, Izami, whatever it is, but, Kagurabachi wiki, let me just open this up real quick, go to characters, and the, Kabanagi. No, it looks like that we just know Izami by the singular name of Izami. We don't really have a last name for him, so I don't know if we particularly know who this Hibiki is, but it seems like this is going to be much more of a bigger conflict here, so we'll probably learn next chapter, if not decently soon, right? But the Kabanagi geezer sort of just continues saying, like, hey, they can't expect to take down his place without an enchanted blade. Was their plan foiled by Samura being held back? And he's like, no. It almost seems like they were planning on him disengaging Al the whole time. He's like, okay, what are they plotting? He's like, well, in any case, right, he's like, hey, if this place is a battlefield, right, as it seems that he's getting ready to do something, as we just see a little bit of a whirl sound effect. And honestly, I don't know what this could be, right? But we then just see some more security system things going on, as there's just an announcement all over the general area of the Kabanagi HQ, just saying like, hey, all non-combatants evacuate immediately to the lowest level, pretty much, right? as we then go over and pretty much look into a hospital room in the Kabunabi headquarters, right? As we see one of my personal favorite Kabunabi members, the guy who sort of has, like, the breathing apparatus over his head and, like, this honestly, like, big, massive, long, almost mane of hair is what I'll call it, pretty much walks over to a little bit of a, like, MRI-looking machine, right? As this guy just says, like, hey, sorry, I know you're just waking up, but as soon as you can see to it, it's an emergency. Like, can you move around here? As we see that he is talking to none other than Hakuri, as Hakuri's just like, hey, at your service, sir. And that is where we end off this chapter of Kagurabachi on this really awesome moment of like, hey, Hakari's here! And bro, I was so ready for this. Like, we haven't seen Hakuri in so long, and just sitting here being like, oh my gosh, he's finally back. It's just so awesome. I mean, this is my favorite character in Kagurabachi. I'm sure it's almost everybody else's at this point, but it's just really awesome to see him in this chapter. I mean, we see so stupidly much in this chapter. Of course, like, hey, we learn Kogiri's sorcery technique. We see him dart away, of course, with Todo and Hirohiko and himself, right? They're all getting out of here, right? Oh no, it looks like the other 7 Hishaku are getting ready to attack the Kabunabi headquarters. And it's like, whoa, that's sort of a really big deal. Oh, look at this. Chihiro and Samura have a little bit of a conversation in this moment, and it seems like Chihiro really wants to stop Samura from doing all this for the main reason of being with his daughter. So, of course, he knows the pain of losing his father, and he doesn't want Igori to go through really that same thing, even though she already has, by all means, pretty much, right? And of course, we then get all of these various looks inside of the Kabunabi HQ, all of these various things going on. And can I just say how much I love the world building aspect of like this pool of water and this poor like sensory sorcerer pretty much like who's acting as the security system going through, and just like the ripples in the water showing where invaders are. It's just like a really cool visual, and I absolutely love it here in the moment. And then the whole thing of like, I'm honestly also really loving the Kabunabi leader. Of course, we know that he wasn't involved with hiding Rokuhira all of those years ago, which honestly makes me trust him a good bit. I don't see like he will be a traitor at all, really. I recently was talking to some people. There'll be an announcement probably next chapter review about something I'm going to be doing with a few other people, but Kagurabachi related. But we were sort of like talking about these chapters, and there was a whole little debate about like, oh, a lot of people seem to believe that the Kabunabi Geezers, I've been calling him, was the one who sort of routed out, of course, who's his face, Rokuhira's location all of those years ago. I'm honestly not very sold on that sort of ploy, but I can sort of see why some people would think about that pretty much. But I'm honestly just really loving the Kabunabi leader, as he's pretty much like, hey, let them infiltrate even if it's worse for us, because we cannot let regular old citizens be harmed. I'm really liking this moment, and of course, like, hey, it seems like we're going to be able to see more of Izami go through and really do his thing with, of course, his lightning sorcery abilities, and like, hey, it looks like Hakari's going to be in this game again. Like, hey, I can't wait to see one of the Sazanami clan members get to do something absolutely awesome. And of course, if he's recovered, is he going to be using his powers pretty much? Like, are we going to see like, oh, wait a second, all of a sudden Subaru's here and we're going to recall his Enchanted Blade? Are we going to see him with the other ones? It's just going to be a really interesting question. And honestly, it may be a thing where Hakuri's going to be able to be like, okay, Chihiro, we're going to bring you over here. And there's the possibility that, of course, he's also registered Samura, so bringing almost all of our key players here in a big frontal attack. That would be absolutely amazing. And honestly, with that, I really don't have too much else to say about this chapter. I feel like I've been recording for a good long while. Let me check the recording real quick. Yeah, we've almost been recording for 30 minutes, which is absolutely insane on this Kagurabachi chapter, but we just had so incredible much, and of course, after a break week, this was a great chapter of Kagurabachi. Literally, I don't think you could say anything else. But yeah, with all that out of the way, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Kagurabachi, chapter number 78. Of course, this chapter was titled Switch. I don't know if we're talking about like, oh, it's just like this switcheroo of things going on, like the switch of Hirohiko's emotions. I don't really know why the chapter is titled that, but really, Kagurabachi, I've given up on trying to understand chapter titles at some point because I almost never do. But yeah, either way, thank you guys so much for watching this chapter review. And like, hey, if you did enjoy it, I've talked about Kagurabachi plenty of other times on this YouTube channel. There will be a playlist not only linked in the description box down below, but also on the end card of this YouTube video that, of course, you guys are watching right now. So go check all of those out. Of course, I talk about plenty of other anime and manga related content here on the YouTube channel. Just go down and like click on my channel icon or visit at Glowplasma on YouTube, and you can see all the content I produce there. But really fun out of the way. Thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Kagurabachi chapter number 78. Again, this chapter was titled Switch, and I'll see you guys next time for Kagurabachi chapter number 79. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week. This will be Glowplasma 231 signing out. I need to mention it one more time. Twilight Wave is such a cool move name. Alright, I'll catch you guys later. Thanks, Bocce Bros, for watching. Signing out.